100 years ago, it was culturally normal to go to church, even if you didn't believe in your heart anything that you heard there.
Given that the UK is a Christian country, well, it's a nice thought. I'm not sure it is very these days. We've got a majority who would like to identify themselves as Christian. It's not quite where I'd like it to be in those terms.
We're not a Christian country anymore. We have disconnected from that past, so people aren't going to church.
That's right, that we're reaching a point of pluralism where we can no longer assume that Christian values are predominant. Certainly they're part of the heritage.
Statistically they're in decline, but there may be as many people going to church as there always has been.
Certainly since the Second World War, that's what's been happening. People have been leaving the churches.
Whereas people used to go to church maybe twice on Sunday, now they might go once every 2 weeks.
Every survey that is done shows that fewer people go to church each year.
One of the most central issues really for us to explore is what actually is church.
And when people look at churches as they actually are, what they see is not so much what churches are really talking about or really pointing to, as a whole set of practices that are just eccentric. Here are people sitting in rows and singing together, usually in a rather dreary way, and here are certain patterns and expectations about relationships that seem, again, very remote. And all of that can, I think, undermine the credibility of the church.
A church, in some ways, could be a building, a bit like the one that we've got behind us here. That's how many people think of a church. That's what a church is. But really, in essence, what a church is a community of people that are making a difference in the world.
When I hear the word church, the building comes in my mind.
Weddings and funerals.
Lots of negative things. It's terrible.
We've failed to think as the new generation and generations now have come along with what will church look like for them.
We speak to them in their culture, so we need that kind of church.
Biggest group in church are adults. It's kind of hard for them to understand young people.
Because they see it as something that's traditional, something that's historical, something that's not particularly relevant to them or connected to them.
Tradition isn't a bad thing in itself. Traditionalism is usually a very bad thing. Tradition is, if you like, what's handed on as sensible, insightful, enriching ways of looking at things. And in that sense, I say 3 cheers for tradition. Traditionalism is really saying you can never do anything for the first time.
600 churches that I've worked with, one of the questions asked is always ask, how's your kids work? And we also did a survey in one town of 45 churches, and 45 churches in Colchester in England, 2 of them said, our youth work is pretty good.
Particularly young people are not going to church, they're not being sent to Sunday school by their parents.
So you'll have lots of people who stopped thinking about Christianity when they were 8 or when they were 7, and they kind of know enough of the vocabulary to get in, but that's as far as it goes.
What it would take is people who are able to teach what the church has to offer so that they can have a better understanding, because the problem is they don't have an understanding of what the church has.
Reaching it out to them through relevant ways and through relevant means.
You have to kind of find new ways of coming together.
Would you like to start a new congregation, not a new church, just a new congregation of your church, which is seriously focused at young people?
The traditional church buildings aren't big enough anymore, or they're not suitable for the changing styles of worship and service in the neighbourhood.
So a lot of churches are starting new buildings, renting new facilities, which are sort of really friendly to non-Christians.
Again, it's what kind of world do you want to live in? A larger one or a smaller one? And I think the sense that people need to have that space for them says they'd rather live in a larger world.
I think what's important about that change from being in a church building to be out somewhere is that you're moving from being in a private space, shut away, to be in a more public space. So if you're meeting in a bar or a restaurant or somewhere, or a cafe, then other people are probably around you and will see what you're doing. So there's a sense of connecting with the real world that comes with that.
The other reason is you just have to go where the people are.
If Jesus would come in our lifetime, this is where the places that he would be preaching his message. He would be preaching in the pubs, he would be preaching in the nightclubs. This is where the people that needs to hear the most are.
We know what church is. Church is communion. Communion connects us with Christ. Communion gives us an opportunity to deal with our sin. Communion gives us an opportunity to say sorry to one another and forgive one another. And we're going to do it in a way which you're familiar with, which really fits you, fits your culture.
Well, I see a church as a place where people help, not just people within the church, but help in the wider community.
For me, church is family. It's people I can always come to.
A place where people come together to celebrate, to worship God, meet people and have a community together.
A church is anywhere where Christians meet together to perform Jesus' purposes on the earth. Doesn't matter how big a group of people it is or how small or where they meet. If they're meeting to worship Jesus, to serve him, to look after the poor, to do what he would be doing, then that's church.